You think African American desserts were just sweet potato pie and banana pudding? Think again. From Depression-era ingenuity to harvest celebrations, Black kitchens created desserts that carried heritage, resourcefulness, and love in every bite. Here are 60 African American desserts no one makes anymore. Molasses stack cake was the layered reunion dessert that carried Appalachian history into Black family gatherings where traditions blended and traveled through generations. Thin cake layers were baked one at a time in well-greased pans, each one soft, warm, and smelling of ginger cinnamon and deep molasses, sweetness. The filling was made from cooked molasses or spiced fruit spread into glossy layers that softened the cake as it rested overnight, turning the entire stack into a tender, richly flavored dessert that cut cleanly into tall slices. The cake was humble yet impressive, built from repetition, patience, and steady hands, moving in practiced rhythm across the kitchen. At reunions, it stood out because its flavor was warm and old-fashioned, and its height made people gather around with curiosity and appreciation. Every bite carried slow winter baking, homegrown molasses, and the memory of cooks who stretched ingredients into something celebratory. Molasses stack cake tasted like time effort and love stacked carefully into something sweet enough to share across an entire family. Cheese ball rolled in pecans sat proudly on serving platters surrounded by crackers, its cream cheese base mixed with cheddar, green onions, and seasonings before being shaped into a perfect sphere and coated with chopped pecans. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with shredded sharp cheddar, finely chopped green onions, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and sometimes hot sauce for complexity. The mixture was then shaped into a ball or log, wrapped in plastic, and chilled until firm enough to handle. Just before serving, the cheese ball was rolled in finely chopped pecans that created a crunchy, nutty coating contrasting beautifully with the creamy interior. In 1970s Black households, cheese balls represented sophistication and effort, centerpieces of appetizer spreads that showed guests the host had put thought into the gathering. Children loved them because they could spread the cheese themselves onto crackers, feeling grown-up and independent. Pepper jelly and cream cheese balanced sweet heat against cool creaminess, becoming a fixture on African American Christmas tables by mid-century. Homemade pepper jelly used hot peppers from summer gardens, preserved with sugar and vinegar, until transformed into jewel-colored spreads glowing when held to light. A block of cream cheese served as foundation, jelly spooned generously over top, crackers provided for spreading. The combination worked because cream cheese tempered pepper heat while jelly's sweetness enhanced complex flavors. Families took pride in jelly making skills, adjusting pepper varieties for signature heat levels. Some added bell peppers for color, others used habaneros for serious spice. The appetizer required no last-minute preparation, ideal for hosts juggling multiple dishes. Church gatherings featured several versions, guests comparing heat levels and declaring favorites. The tradition represented how African American cooks elevated simple ingredients through preservation techniques from generations past. Peanut brittle with cane syrup was a candy made from calloused hands and steady hearts. Peanuts, cheap, filling, and familiar, were roasted and stirred into bubbling cane syrup that hissed and popped in iron pots. The mixture was poured thin onto greased pans, cooling into a golden sheet that cracked like glass when broken. It was the sound of celebration in a time that offered few. Farmers sold it at local markets or handed it out at church gatherings, a taste of sweetness earned through labor. Every bite was sticky and sharp, nutty and smoky, holding the flavor of both soil and sweat. The process demanded timing, too much heat and it burned, too little and it stayed soft. Children watched wide-eyed as the syrup darkened and hardened, knowing that patience was the price of pleasure. It stuck to your teeth, your fingers, and your memory. Peanut brittle was not store-bought fancy. It was handmade history, a candy forged from work, patience, and the deep sweetness of Southern earth. Persimmon pudding was the dense winter dessert that appeared only when the strange orange fruit finally ripened enough to use. In many African American homes, someone always knew which neighbor had a tree or where to find persimmons at the market right after the first frost. Once the fruit was soft enough to mash, elders would turn it into a thick batter flavored with spices, sugar, and a little butter. It baked into a dark, fragrant pudding, somewhere between a cake and a custard, rich enough to stand alone, but even better with a drizzle of cream. The texture was smooth, comforting, and unmistakably tied to the season. Families appreciated it because persimmons did not come year-round. They were special. They marked the moment when winter holidays were truly beginning. Eating persimmon pudding felt like honoring tradition, like respecting the rhythm of the land and the patience required to wait for fruit that ripened in its own time, and that timing made every slice feel like a celebration. Old-fashioned jelly roll was dessert-turned performance, a swirl of care baked into every slice. The sponge cake had to be thin, soft, and baked just long enough to hold without cracking. Mama spread a layer of fruit preserves, strawberry, peach, or sometimes homemade blackberry, then rolled it tight while still warm. A dusting of powdered sugar finished it off, white as a light snowfall. When sliced, each round showed perfect spirals of color and cake, the kind that made guests lean closer just to admire the work. It looked delicate, but it was made strong, like the women who baked it. Jelly roll was the dessert that proved patience and precision could live side by side with joy. Every bite was soft and sweet, the tartness of fruit cutting through the sugar just enough. Children waited for the ends, where the filling overflowed and the shape loosened. The rest was served proudly, a centerpiece born from steady hands and time well spent. It was dessert as tradition, meant to be admired before eaten. A jelly roll said, "We may not have much, but what we do have we make beautiful." And it always was, humble, pretty, and filled with love. Blackstrap molasses pie was a masterpiece of thrift and flavor, born from necessity and shaped by the hands of enslaved and freed cooks alike. Made from the thick, dark syrup left after refining sugarcane, it turned bitterness into beauty. Eggs, butter, and a pinch of spice transformed it into something glossy and rich, a dessert that shimmered like polished wood under the oven's glow. It tasted of smoke and sweetness, deep and unapologetic. This pie was not about delicacy, it was about endurance. Even when sugar was out of reach, molasses stood in, sweetening the lives of those who had little else. A slice of it was heavy with meaning, connecting field to table, struggle to celebration. Long after it cooled, its scent lingered, a quiet testament to resourcefulness and grace. In every bite of blackstrap molasses pie was the history of turning scarcity into art. Fried chicken wings served as Christmas appetizers long before buffalo sauce made them famous, appearing on African-American tables seasoned with salt, pepper, and cayenne. Wings were considered less desirable cuts, making them affordable for families who reserved breast meat for main courses. The preparation was straightforward. Wings dredged in seasoned flour and fried in cast iron until skin turned deeply golden and crackled with each bite. Served hot on platters lined with paper napkins, they disappeared within minutes of hitting the table. The seasoning varied by household, with some families adding garlic powder, others preferring paprika for color. Children claimed wings as their territory, knowing adults would focus on other dishes. Church gatherings featured massive platters of wings, with cooks competing over whose seasoning achieved perfect balance. These wings represented pure Southern tradition before commercialization, proving simple preparation of quality ingredients created food people remembered. Pimento cheese pinwheels made with tortillas spread with creamy pimento cheese and rolled into tight spirals created colorful, easy-to-eat bites that children grabbed enthusiastically. Aunties would spread flour tortillas with homemade pimento cheese made from sharp cheddar, cream cheese, diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings. The tortillas were then rolled tightly into logs, wrapped in plastic wrap, and refrigerated for several hours to firm up and make slicing easier. Once chilled, the logs were unwrapped and sliced into rounds about half an inch thick, each pinwheel revealing the bright orange cheese dotted with red pimento pieces. In 1970s, Black households' pimento cheese pinwheels represented modern entertaining, a variation on traditional pimento cheese that made serving easier and more elegant. Children loved pimento cheese pinwheels because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and tasted like their favorite spread in a fun new format. Coconut cake was the tall white winter bright dessert covered in soft flakes that clung to the frosting like new fallen snow, making it one of the most beautiful desserts on any reunion table. The cake layers baked into soft, tender rounds that held moisture well, especially when brushed lightly with sweet coconut milk or simple syrup to deepen the flavor. The frosting was smooth and fluffy, often made from cooked icing or whipped cream cheese depending on the family recipe, and once spread across the cake, it formed the perfect base for the final snowy coating. Handfuls of coconut were pressed gently against the sides, falling lightly across the top until the cake looked like something crafted for celebration. Its flavor was light sweet and refreshing, offering a cool softness that balanced the heavier, richer desserts around it. Coconut cake tasted like reunions. Church gatherings and holidays rolled into one dessert as children reached for it, first drawn to the snowy look while adults reached for it last, wanting to savor the gentle sweetness. Pigs in blankets made with cocktail franks wrapped in crescent roll dough emerged from ovens as perfect little packages that children ate by the handful, their small size making them perfect for young appetites and hands that grabbed multiple pieces at once. Mothers would unroll refrigerated crescent dough, separating it along the perforations before cutting each triangle in half to create smaller pieces that wrapped around cocktail-sized hot dogs snugly. The wrapped franks were arranged on baking sheets with the dough seam facing down, sometimes brushed with melted butter or beaten egg for extra golden color. As they baked, the dough puffed up and turned flaky and golden, while the franks inside steamed and stayed juicy, creating combinations of textures that made every bite satisfying. In the 1970s, Black households, pigs in blankets represented quick, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Children loved them because they were perfectly sized for little hands. Deviled ham spread turned leftover Christmas ham into appetizers, stretching holiday abundance across days of family visiting. Cook's ground or finely chopped cooked ham, blending with mayonnaise, mustard, pickle relish, and hot sauce until reaching perfect spreading consistency. The mixture was packed into crocks, ready to spread on crackers whenever guests arrived unexpectedly. The term deviled referred to spice and mustard, giving the spread its distinctive kick, transforming plain ham into something with personality. Families appreciated how spread made a little ham go far, feeding dozens from what might otherwise be a single sandwich. Children loved helping grind ham through hand-cranked meat grinders, turning handles while adults added seasonings. The spread kept for days, improving as flavors melded together. This appetizer represented the African-American philosophy of abundance through creativity, making sure no guest left hungry and no food went to waste during the most important gathering season of the entire year. Caramel bread pudding was born in the corners of quiet kitchens, where nothing was wasted and everything had purpose. Day-old bread soaked in milk, eggs, and sugar became a dessert of astonishing richness once baked with a drizzle of caramelized syrup. The edges crisped, while the inside stayed soft and custard-like, every bite warm and buttery with a hint of burnt sugar. It was the sort of dessert that stretched humble ingredients to their full glory, comforting, dependable, and generous. People made it after Sunday supper or for gatherings, serving it straight from the pan with spoons and laughter. The sweetness wasn't just in the taste, it was in the act of turning leftovers into something beautiful. The caramel, cooked just long enough to darken but not burn, gave depth to the flavor, transforming simplicity into elegance. Sometimes raisins or nuts were added, sometimes a dash of spice. But the heart of the dish remained the same, resourcefulness turned delicious. Caramel bread pudding was not a dish of luxury, but of gratitude, a way of saying that even what seemed forgotten still had worth, that love could be reheated and shared again. Ambrosia with marshmallows and citrus was the bright, festive bowl that lit up holiday tables even before anyone picked up a spoon. It was a Southern tradition carried into African-American homes with pride, mixing oranges, pineapple, coconut, and soft marshmallows into a dish that tasted like sunshine breaking through winter clouds. Some families added cherries for color, Some added pecans for crunch, and some kept it simple, letting the fruit and cream speak for themselves. This was the dessert brought out when plates were heavy with savory food and people needed something light to lift the meal. The first spoonful always tasted refreshing, cool, and nostalgic all at once, carrying the memory of church potlucks and Sunday dinners into the holidays. Grandmothers made it the night before so the flavors could blend, checking the bowl in the refrigerator like it was a secret too special to open too early. When it finally reached the table, it drew smiles from anyone who grew up with it because ambrosia was never just fruit. It was a reminder of family history, of thrift, of turning simple ingredients into something joyful, and for many households, no holiday felt complete without it. Banana pudding with vanilla wafers was the dessert that always arrived in the biggest glass dish, the one carried with two hands because it was filled to the top with layers of comfort history and family pride. Grandmothers lined the bottom with vanilla wafers and then poured warm homemade custard over them, letting the cookies soften slowly until they became part of the pudding itself. Tender, sweet, and soaked with flavor. Sliced bananas were tucked between the layers in soft, pale rounds, adding freshness that lifted the sweetness and made the dish feel alive. More custard came next, then more wafers, and then another layer again until the dish was nearly overflowing. Some finished it with whipped topping, while others insisted on meringue browned in the oven until the peaks turned golden. When the dish hit the reunion table, spoons clattered against bowls and children rushed forward because everyone knew banana pudding disappeared fast. It tasted like childhood afternoons, like front porches, like kitchens filled with steam and voices talking over one another while dessert chilled in the refrigerator. Banana pudding was beloved not because it was fancy, but because every family made it slightly differently and each version carried its own memories. It was the dessert that united generations one scoop at a time. Sweet potato bites topped with mini marshmallows were dessert-like appetizers that blurred the line between side dish and treat, their orange flesh and white topping creating visual appeal that drew children like magnets before dinner was served. Mothers would bake sweet potatoes until soft, then scoop out the flesh and mash it with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla extract until smooth and creamy. The sweetened sweet potato mixture was spooned into mini muffin tins or shaped into small balls and placed on baking sheets, each one topped with a single mini marshmallow that would toast golden brown. As they baked, the marshmallows puffed up and turned golden, creating that characteristic toasted flavor that children associated with campfires and summer fun. In the 1970s Black households, these bites represented creativity, taking traditional candied yams and reimagining them as finger foods children could grab. Fried pork skins crackled in cast-iron skillets during African-American Christmas preparations, transforming pig skin into crispy snacks. The skins were cleaned, scraped, and dried before being fried twice, first to render fat, then at high heat to puff. The result was light, crunchy, and deeply porky, seasoned with salt or cayenne and garlic. Families served them warm in bowls, watching guests grab handfuls before main celebrations. The preparation connected to hog-killing traditions when nothing was wasted and every part had purpose. Children loved the crunch and saltiness, while adults appreciated how skins paired with cold drinks. Making pork skins required skill. Temperature had to be exact or they'd burn. The tradition represented African-American mastery of transforming humble ingredients into something people craved. Fried pork skins reminded everyone that celebration didn't require expensive ingredients. Apple brown. Betty with stale bread was the quiet triumph of thrift, a dessert that turned yesterday's scraps into something worthy of company. Old loaves were torn into pieces, layered with sliced apples, sugar, and butter, then baked until the kitchen smelled like home itself. The bread soaked up the apple juices and syrup, becoming tender and golden at once, with just enough crisp at the top to remind you that life could still surprise you. It was food for people who didn't waste a thing, for those who found sweetness in the ordinary. The dish required no exact recipe, just instinct, warmth, and what was on hand. Some added cinnamon or molasses if they had it. Others simply let the apples speak for themselves. Each bite was familiar, comforting, and honest. Apple Brown Betty was proof that love, like flavor, could bloom even from what was left behind. Buttermilk pie was one of those desserts that proved a holiday table did not need anything complicated to feel complete. It was made from the humblest ingredients, the kind families always had on hand: buttermilk, sugar, eggs, butter, and a little flour to hold everything together. Somehow, those few things transformed into a custard pie that tasted far richer than the recipe suggested. The filling baked into a silky center with a golden top that cracked just slightly when you cut into it. The kind of crackle that let you know the texture underneath was going to be perfect. Grandmothers made this pie with a calm confidence, whisking everything together in one bowl like they were stirring up memories instead of batter. Kids hovered nearby waiting for the bowl, while adults tried to pretend they were not watching the oven as the house filled with that warm, sweet smell. Buttermilk pie tasted like softness, like reassurance, like the kind of dessert that wrapped itself around you rather than demanding attention. It was a holiday staple not because it was fancy, but because it was reliable, comforting, and always welcome, no matter how many desserts were already on the table. When slices were served after big family meals, they were eaten slowly, with quiet moments of appreciation that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with tradition. And long after the holidays ended, people remembered this pie for exactly what it was: a simple dessert that somehow made the season feel complete. Fried green tomatoes served as Christmas appetizers when late-season gardens yielded unripe fruit needing use before frost. Firm green tomatoes were sliced, dipped in buttermilk, then dredged in seasoned cornmeal before frying until golden. The tomatoes inside stayed firm with tangy brightness cutting through the rich cornmeal crust. Families served them hot on platters with remoulade or comeback sauce for dipping. The preparation required attention. Oil temperature maintained precisely, tomatoes not too ripe or they'd fall apart. Grandmothers who mastered fried green tomatoes passed techniques to daughters and granddaughters. The appetizer represented waste-nothing philosophy, finding celebration in produce otherwise discarded. Children discovered they loved the tangy, crispy bites, even when claiming to dislike tomatoes. Fried green tomatoes connected Christmas tables to gardens, honoring the land-sustaining families. Smoked oysters on crackers with hot sauce were adventurous bites that curious children tried. The smoky, briny oysters creating complex flavors that divided people into lovers and haters with no middle ground. Fathers would open tins of smoked oysters packed in oil, arranging them on serving platters surrounded by crackers and providing small bottles of hot sauce for those who wanted extra heat. The oysters had a strong, distinctive flavor, smoky from the curing process and intensely oceanic. Each oyster was placed on a cracker, sometimes with a tiny drop of hot sauce, creating bite-sized portions that delivered maximum flavor. In 1970s, Black household smoked oysters represented coastal sophistication and culinary bravery, appetizers that showed guests the host was willing to serve bold, distinctive foods. Children who tried smoked oysters either loved them immediately or swore them off forever, the strong flavor creating lasting memories. Buttermilk pie was the tangy, smooth reunion dessert that never lasted long, which is why most families baked two at a time, knowing the first would disappear before the dinner plates were cleared. The filling was made from buttermilk, eggs, sugar butter, and a touch of lemon baked into a custard that set into a firm, silky center with a lightly browned top. Each slice tasted bright, sweet, and slightly tart, resting inside a flaky crust that held everything together beautifully. Buttermilk pie was simple, reliable, and deeply comforting a dessert that brought people back for seconds and thirds. At reunions, it reminded everyone that the most memorable dishes often came from the simplest ingredients handled with care. Pickled shrimp marinated in vinegar, oil, and spices created tangy, flavorful bites that adventurous children tried. The cold, tender shrimp infused with herbs and aromatics that made them taste complex. Aunties would boil shrimp until just cooked, then peel them and place them in jars or bowls where they were covered with a marinade of vinegar, oil, sliced onions, bay leaves, peppercorns, and sometimes lemon slices. The shrimp marinated for at least 24 hours, absorbing the tangy, aromatic flavors and developing a pickled taste that was both refreshing and sophisticated. The marinated shrimp were served cold with toothpicks for easy serving, the onions and bay leaves removed or left in depending on family preference. In Black households during the 1970s, pickled shrimp represented make-ahead convenience, appetizers that actually improved with time. Children who tried pickled shrimp discovered seafood could be tangy and bright. Stuffed celery brought elegance and crunch to African-American Christmas appetizer spreads, with crisp stalks serving as vessels for savory fillings. The classic filling combined cream cheese with chopped olives, pimentos, and sometimes blue cheese piped into the celery's natural groove. Other variations used pimento cheese, deviled ham spread, or seasoned cream cheese with chives. The preparation was simple enough for children to help, making it a family activity during holiday cooking. Celery was affordable and available even in winter, while fillings stretched expensive ingredients across many servings. Arranged on platters with stuffed sides facing up, they created colorful rows looking far fancier than their modest cost. Ladies' auxiliaries featured stuffed celery at every gathering, with cooks varying fillings to showcase creativity. The appetizer satisfied those wanting something light, providing crunch and freshness, balancing heavy fare. Stuffed celery represented the gift for making simple ingredients feel celebratory. Vanilla wafer banana pudding was the quiet masterpiece that families prepared the night before because everyone knew it tasted better after waiting. Grandma layered those vanilla wafers, bananas, and pudding like she was building a story, one chapter at a time. She always used a glass dish so you could see each layer, each memory stacked on top of the last. The wafers softened overnight, turning from crisp cookies into tender bites that tasted like childhood. The bananas darkened just a little, sweetening as they settled into the custard, and the pudding, creamy, cool, and smooth, brought everything together the way elders often did, without saying much. Banana pudding was the dessert you could count on to show up at Christmas, Easter, church dinners, or any gathering where family needed a reminder of who they were. In the 70s, when days were long and work was heavy, this pudding waited in the refrigerator like a promise of comfort after whatever the world had taken that week. Kids scraped the sides of the pan, adults got the first big scoop, and no one complained because everyone got exactly what they wanted. It was simple, humble, and unforgettable. A dessert of patience, time, and tenderness. Chess pie was the kind of dessert that whispered simplicity and sang sweetness. It came from a time when cupboards were nearly bare, but love was not. Eggs, sugar, butter, and a bit of cornmeal made magic together, baking into a golden custard that firmed just enough to hold its shape. The crust flaked beneath your fork, the filling melted on your tongue, and the taste lingered long after the last bite. Mama made it when there was no fruit, no cream, no fuss, just the promise of something warm to end the meal. The top would brown just right, with tiny bubbles that caught the light like amber glass. Some said it got its name because folks would ask, "What kind of pie is this?" And Mama would smile and say, "Just pie." But everyone knew there was nothing just about it. It was the flavor of thrift turned tender, sweetness drawn from almost nothing. Chess pie taught patience, balance, and the art of making ordinary things extraordinary. It did not need decoration, just a clean plate and a quiet moment. Each bite was a reminder that love does not need luxury to shine. It only needs a reason to share. Country ham biscuits anchored African-American Christmas appetizer spreads with perfect balance of salty, smoky meat and tender, buttery bread. Paper-thin slices of cured country ham were tucked into small biscuits fresh from the oven, sometimes with butter or mustard, creating bites delivering intense flavor in compact form. The ham itself was precious, cured for months in smokehouses and sliced carefully to stretch across many servings. Families who raised their own hogs took pride in serving ham they had cured themselves, while others purchased from local farmers maintaining traditional methods. The biscuits had to be made small, sized for 2 bites at most, ensuring guests could sample without filling up before main meals. Church gatherings featured trays of ham biscuits passed by hand, with recipes for both ham curing and biscuit making guarded as treasures. The combination represented Southern hospitality at its finest, offering guests something homemade, flavorful, and prepared with obvious care and skill. Sausage balls made with breakfast sausage, cheese, and biscuit mix, baked into savory spheres that children popped into their mouths like candy, their crispy exteriors giving way to soft, cheesy, slightly spicy interiors. Mothers would combine raw breakfast sausage with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and dry biscuit mix, kneading everything together until well combined. The mixture was then rolled into balls about an inch in diameter, arranged on baking sheets with space between them, and baked until golden brown. As they baked, the fat from the sausage rendered while the cheese melted, creating savory, flavorful bites that were crispy outside and tender inside. In the 1970s, Black households, sausage balls represented easy entertaining, a recipe that could be made ahead. Children loved sausage balls because they were perfectly portioned, required no utensils, and delivered breakfast flavors in snackable form. Praline candy made with pecans was the after-dinner treat that moved from hand to hand at family reunions, wrapped in pieces of wax paper that stuck slightly to the sugary surface. These candies were cooked in heavy pots where butter, sugar, and evaporated milk simmered together until the mixture thickened into a fragrant caramel-colored base. She stirred constantly with a wooden spoon, watching for the moment when the mixture coated the spoon just right. Then she added the pecans, letting them tumble into the pot and soak up the sweetness before she dropped spoonfuls onto wax paper sheets spread across the counter. As the pralines cooled, they set into soft, rich pieces that melted on the tongue with a taste of butter, brown sugar, and roasted nuts. Children waited impatiently for them to harden, and adults reached for them with the same excitement. Praline candy felt like generosity because each piece was made by hand and shared freely across the reunion. It tasted warm, sweet, and familiar, carrying the flavor of tradition in every bite. Butter beans cooked with ham hock and served in small cups became hearty appetizers that filled hungry children before dinner, their creamy texture and smoky flavor creating comfort in every spoonful. Grandmothers would simmer dried butter beans with ham hocks, onions, and seasonings for hours until the beans became tender and creamy while absorbing the smoky, salty flavor from the meat. The finished beans were served in small portions in cups or bowls with small spoons, allowing guests to enjoy them without needing plates. Some families topped the beans with crumbled cornbread or a drizzle of hot sauce for extra flavor and texture. In Black households during the 1970s, butter beans represented soul food tradition brought to the appetizer table, showing that holiday food could honor heritage while fitting modern entertaining formats. Children loved butter beans because they tasted familiar and comforting, like Thanksgiving dinner in miniature form that warmed them from the inside. Fried chicken liver pâté brought sophisticated flavors to African American Christmas tables without requiring expensive ingredients. Chicken livers were sautéed with onions in butter until cooked through, then blended smooth with cream cheese, bourbon, and warm spices. The mixture was packed into crocks and chilled until firm enough to spread on crackers or toast points. The flavor was rich and earthy, with bourbon adding warmth complementing holiday celebrations. Families valued this appetizer because chicken livers cost pennies compared to fancy imported pâtés, yet the result tasted equally elegant. Grandmothers who learned to stretch every dollar transformed humble organs into something guests assumed came from specialty shops. The pâté kept well for days, ready to serve whenever visitors stopped by. Children often wrinkled noses at the idea, but adults savored every creamy bite. This dish proved African American cooks could create refinement from resourcefulness, turning ordinary into extraordinary. Molasses cookies were the kind of treat that spoke of both scarcity and comfort, sweetened with molasses at times when refined sugar was too expensive or unavailable. African American families leaned on them during hard years, blending flour, lard or butter, spices, and molasses into a dough that baked into dark, fragrant rounds. The cookies were crisp at the edges, soft in the middle, and carried the rich depth of ginger, cinnamon, or nutmeg depending on what was on hand. Their aroma filled kitchens with warmth, especially in colder months when families gathered close. They were often packed into tins, lasting several days and serving as an affordable snack for children. Each bite carried a story of resilience, showing how cooks transformed limited resources into joy. Molasses cookies were also staples at community events, baked in batches for socials or fundraisers. Over time, as refined sugar became more accessible, the cookies slowly disappeared from regular baking. Yet they remained tied to memory, representing cleverness and the sweetness of making do. Hummingbird cake was the Southern favorite that fluttered into holiday potlucks and never stayed on the table for long. Made with bananas, pineapple, pecans, and warm spices, this cake was moist, fragrant, and layered with cream cheese frosting that made it impossible to resist. Every bite tasted like a blend of tropical sweetness and traditional comfort, a combination that felt lively and joyful during family gatherings. The cake looked unassuming, but its flavor made people close their eyes for a moment. Families passed around slices on small plates while swapping stories, laughing loudly, and trying to get a second serving before it disappeared. Hummingbird cake brought the spirit of celebration into every room it entered. Peach cobbler was the bubbling reunion dessert that pulled people toward the kitchen long before the pan ever hit the table, filling the air with the smell of peaches, sugar, and warm spices. Whether made from fresh peaches in the summer or canned peaches during the rest of the year, the filling cooked down into a thick golden mixture that tasted like sunshine and memory. The crust varied from family to family, sometimes a lattice, sometimes a full sheet of dough, sometimes spooned on like dumplings, but always baked until brown, crisp, and irresistible. When the cobbler came out of the oven, the juices bubbled around the edges, and the scent wrapped itself around the entire gathering, making people line up with bowls in hand. Served warm with melting ice cream, or on its own, it tasted like the heart of Southern Sundays and long afternoons, spent talking, laughing, and passing plates across crowded tables. Peach cobbler was more than dessert. It was a tradition carried proudly by the cooks who prepared it year after year. Cheese straws made from sharp cheddar and cayenne pepper were crispy, addictive sticks that disappeared from serving bowls almost as quickly as they were refilled, their orange gold color and spicy kick making them irresistible. Grandmothers would grate blocks of sharp cheddar by hand, mixing it with softened butter, flour, cayenne pepper, and salt until the dough came together, then pressing it through cookie presses or rolling it into long ropes before slicing. The cheese straws baked until crispy and slightly browned at the edges, filling kitchens with the sharp, tangy aroma of melting cheese mixed with subtle heat. Once cooled, they were stored in tins, maintaining crispness for days. In 1970s, Black households, cheese straws represented Southern tradition, recipes passed down through generations with each family adding their signature touch, extra cayenne, paprika, or pecans. Pickled pig's feet appeared on Christmas tables as testament to using every part of the hog with dignity and creativity. Preparation began days before. Feet cleaned meticulously, boiled until tender, then submerged in spiced vinegar brine with bay leaves, peppercorns, and hot peppers. Pickling transformed what some dismissed as scraps into a delicacy with complex flavors, tangy, savory, and rich with gelatin melting on the tongue. Families served them cold from glass jars, arranged on plates with crackers. The dish carried deep significance, representing resourcefulness born of necessity and elevation of humble ingredients into celebration. Elders remembered when pickled feet were everyday sustenance, but Christmas made them special with extra spices and proud presentation. Children often approached with hesitation, but those who learned appreciation became lifelong devotees. The tradition connected holiday tables to ancestral wisdom about wasting nothing and honoring everything that sustains you through hardship and joy alike. Cornmeal pound cake was a thrifty twist on a classic, made by those who refused to let poverty rob them of pleasure. When fine white flour was too costly, cooks reached for cornmeal, the golden grain that had carried generations through hunger. The cake came out dense, hearty, and rich, its grainy texture softened by eggs, butter, and sweet milk when available. It baked slow, filling cabins and cottages with a buttery, nutty warmth that made the simplest home feel like a place of celebration. This was the kind of dessert that came from instinct rather than instruction, measured by memory instead of spoons. Each slice told a story of adaptation, of turning necessity into comfort. The cornmeal gave it grit, but also character, a reminder that sweetness could come from the humblest roots. For many, this was the real taste of home, simple, honest, and strong enough to last. Deep dish peach cobbler was the kind of dessert that made holidays feel complete even when money was tight and groceries needed stretching. Those peaches, sometimes fresh and sometimes from a can, simmered down in sugar and warm spices until the whole pot smelled like sunshine. That refused to leave, Grandma would pour them into a deep dish that had seen more holidays than half the folks sitting at the table, letting the syrup spread and bubble like it had something to say. Her crust was never perfect in shape, but it was perfect in spirit. Thick, golden, and made by hand, pressed together with fingers that knew exactly how to make something tender without being taught. When that cobbler baked, the house felt fuller, warmer, kinder. It was the dessert she brought out after church gatherings, family reunions, and long afternoons where everyone talked loud and laughed louder. The first spoonful always broke through the crust with that soft crackle that made people sit still for a second. Underneath was the peach, filling so rich and syrupy it tasted like home no matter where you were. Holidays in African American families were never just about the fancy dishes. They were about what held people together. Peach cobbler was one of those things not written down, not measured, just understood. It was made with patience, muscle memory, and the unspoken promise that joy would always make a way. Buttermilk pie was the taste of calm after storm, smooth and steady like the rhythm of a southern kitchen. Made from buttermilk, eggs, sugar, and a little flour, it baked into a golden custard that cracked ever so slightly as it cooled. The tartness of the buttermilk met the sweetness of the sugar in perfect balance, simple yet elegant. It was the kind of dessert families made when fruit was gone and patience was all they had left. The pie was a comfort to those who lived by the seasons, making do with what they could churn or gather. Served with coffee or eaten straight from the pan, it held a quiet dignity that needed no decoration. Sometimes it was flavored with a touch of vanilla or a sprinkle of nutmeg, though it needed neither to shine. The first slice always felt like a reward, the last one like a promise to bake again. Buttermilk pie was a slice of memory, reminding every generation that true sweetness often comes from humble beginnings and the courage to make something beautiful out of little, a dessert that tasted like peace earned through patience. Ham biscuits made with country ham and soft dinner rolls became handheld sandwiches that children devoured, the salty ham contrasting perfectly with the sweet, buttery rolls that held everything together. Mothers would slice country ham paper thin, the intensely salty, cured meat packed with flavor that needed only small amounts to satisfy, then tuck the slices into soft dinner rolls that had been split and buttered. Some families brushed the tops of the assembled biscuits with melted butter and baked them briefly to warm everything through and create slightly crispy tops. The combination of salty, savory ham with soft, slightly sweet rolls created perfect flavor balance that kept people coming back for more. In 1970s Black households, ham biscuits represented Southern tradition, appetizers that could be prepared ahead and served at room temperature. Children loved ham biscuits because they were familiar comfort food in easy-to-eat form, requiring no plates or utensils and perfect for grabbing. Lemon icebox pie was the cold, creamy reunion dessert that vanished quickly, especially during summer gatherings when people stayed outside under trees and tents, passing slices across folding tables. She whisked condensed milk, lemon juice, and egg yolks into a smooth filling that thickened naturally before being poured into a crumb crust pressed tightly with skilled fingers. The pie chilled in the refrigerator until firm, developing a bright tart flavor that felt refreshing in humid weather and revived anyone wilted by the heat. Topped with whipped cream, it sliced beautifully into cool, velvety wedges that disappeared almost as fast as she could serve them. Sometimes she added lemon zest for a stronger bite. Sometimes she froze the pie slightly for an extra chill, but it always hit the spot. Lemon icebox pie was beloved because it cooled, The body lifted the mood and tasted like bright sunshine captured in a dessert bowl handed out with love. Smoked fish spread carried coastal African American community flavors to Christmas celebrations far from any shoreline. Smoked mullet, mackerel, or whiting was flaked carefully, then blended with cream cheese, lemon juice, hot sauce, and minced celery and onion. The mixture was chilled until firm, served surrounded by crackers or vegetables for dipping. Smokiness mingled with bright lemon acid and pepper heat, creating layers developing with each bite. Families near coasts smoked their own fish, while those inland relied on specialty markets or mail order from relatives maintaining water connections. The spread represented African American migration experience, carrying food traditions from places of origin to new homes across the country. Children learned to distinguish quality smoked fish by texture and flavor depth, education serving them throughout their lives. The tradition reminded families that no matter how far they traveled, the tastes of home could follow them anywhere they went. Cornbread trifle was the kind of dessert that proved creativity could make even leftovers feel like a feast. When cornbread went stale, it wasn't thrown away. It was reborn. Crumbled into bowls, soaked with sweet milk or molasses, and layered with bits of fruit if available, it became a pudding-like treat that filled bellies and hearts alike. The texture was soft and creamy, rich without requiring riches. It was food for the end of the week, when cupboards were bare but family still gathered to share what was left. Each spoonful carried both sweetness and survival, the magic of making something out of nothing. Cornbread trifle was not a luxury. It was an act of imagination. It turned scarcity into flavor and the ordinary into comfort. Even now, its story lingers, a reminder that sometimes the best recipes are born from the need to keep going. Cornbread dressing dessert bites were the unintentional treats that only the cooks truly understood, created when the edges of the pan caramelized just enough to turn savory into sweet. After the big holiday meal, when everyone else was full and settling into their chairs, the ones who stayed in the kitchen knew those golden edges were the best part. Crisp, browned, slightly sweetened by the butter and aromatics baked into the cornbread itself. Those corner bites tasted like a reward for the people who had prepared the feast. Kids wandered in hoping to sneak one, and elders pretended not to see them take it. These edges were never meant to be dessert, but they always ended up tasting like one, especially when someone drizzled a little leftover cranberry sauce across the top. In 70s households, where nothing went to waste, those sweetened leftover edges became a quiet tradition, shared standing up, talking softly, enjoying one last bite before the evening settled into its slower pace. Cornbread dressing dessert bites were simple, accidental, and unforgettable, the kind of treat only families inside the kitchen ever got to experience fully. Prune cake was a thrifty dessert that turned what many considered a humble ingredient into something rich and satisfying. African American families stewed prunes until soft, then blended them into a spiced cake batter filled with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. The prunes gave the cake a deep sweetness and moist texture that lasted for days, making it perfect for large households or gatherings. It was served plain or dusted with powdered sugar, sometimes with a drizzle of simple icing when resources allowed. Prune cake was practical because prunes kept well in pantries and were affordable compared to fresh fruit. Families valued it not just for thrift, but also for comfort, since its flavor carried warmth and familiarity. It was often baked during holidays or shared at church events, where its rich aroma filled kitchens with anticipation. Today, the cake is rarely seen, dismissed unfairly by modern tastes. Yet it was once beloved, a reminder that clever cooks could transform simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Prune cake stood as proof that desserts were about heart as much as luxury. Pimiento cheese pinwheels brought visual elegance to African American Christmas appetizer spreads while showcasing the beloved Southern spread. Homemade pimiento cheese was spread across flour tortillas, then rolled tightly and chilled before slicing into rounds revealing spiral patterns. The presentation elevated humble pimiento cheese into something looking professionally catered and impressive. Families made pinwheels the day before gatherings, allowing them to firm up properly for clean slicing. The preparation was simple enough for children to help, spreading and rolling while adults handled the cutting. Church suppers featured platters arranged in concentric circles, spirals drawing compliments before the first bite. The pimiento cheese varied by cook. Some preferred sharp cheddar, others added jalapenos for kick. Pinwheels proved that presentation mattered, transforming everyday spread into celebration food. Rumaki-wrapped chicken livers and water chestnuts in bacon created sophisticated bites that curious children tried, the crispy bacon exterior making them willing to taste the unfamiliar liver that turned out mild. Aunties would cut chicken livers into bite-sized pieces, marinate them briefly in soy sauce and ginger, then wrap them with water chestnut slices in bacon before securing everything with toothpicks. The bundles were arranged on baking sheets and roasted until the bacon crisped and rendered, the fat keeping the liver moist while adding smoky saltiness that transformed the organ meat into something special. As they cooked, the soy sauce caramelized slightly, creating a sweet savory glaze that coated the bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, rumaki represented culinary adventurousness, recipes borrowed from magazines that brought international flavors to holiday tables. Children who were brave enough to try them discovered that bacon really did make everything better. Chocolate meringue pie was the kind of special occasion dessert that made the entire reunion crowd stop and stare when someone carried it across the yard. The chocolate filling was rich, smooth, and deeply comforting, cooked on the stove until it thickened into a glossy pudding-like consistency that tasted indulgent even before it reached the crust. She poured the warm filling into a baked shell, letting it settle before turning her attention to the meringue. Egg whites, sugar, and patience whipped together into tall, shining peaks that curled at the tips like soft white flames. She spread the meringue high across the top, making sure it touched the crust so it would not shrink, then baked it until the peaks turned golden brown. When the pie cooled, the meringue stood proudly above the chocolate layer, like a cloud sitting on a dark horizon. Every slice was a balance of silky chocolate crisp crust and airy sweetness. It was a pie meant for sharing, meant for showing off, and meant for making memories at the reunion dessert table. Crab cakes formed into mini patties were seafood luxury that made Thanksgiving feel extra special. The sweet crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs and seasonings before being pan-fried until golden. Grandmothers would pick through cans of crab meat to remove any shell pieces, then gently fold the delicate meat with beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, Old Bay seasoning, and sometimes diced bell peppers. The mixture was formed into small patties, each one handled carefully, then refrigerated briefly to help them hold together during cooking. The crab cakes were pan-fried in butter until golden brown on both sides, the exterior developing a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and packed with sweet crab flavor. In the 1970s, Black households, crab cakes represented coastal sophistication, bringing seafood traditions to holiday tables and elevating the appetizer spread. Children loved mini crab cakes because they felt fancy, tasted sweet rather than fishy, and came in sizes perfect for young appetites. Deviled crab brought coastal luxury to African American Christmas celebrations, with seasoned crab meat packed into shells and baked until golden. Fresh crab was picked clean, then mixed with breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, and enough cayenne to justify the deviled name. The mixture was spooned back into cleaned shells, topped with breadcrumbs and butter, then baked until tops turned crispy brown. Families near the Chesapeake, Gulf Coast, or Carolina shores gathered their own crabs, making this elegant appetizer practically free. The preparation required patience. Picking crab took time, and filling needed careful seasoning to enhance rather than mask sweet crab flavor. Church suppers featured deviled crab as special occasion food, with cooks earning reputations based on signature recipes. Children learned to crack and pick crabs alongside elders, education connecting them to coastal heritage. Deviled crab proved that African American cooks transformed regional abundance into celebration worthy of finest gatherings. Caramel cake with pour-over icing was the holiday showstopper that demanded respect from everyone in the kitchen, even the ones who never baked a thing. The cake itself was soft and buttery, but it was the caramel icing that turned it into something legendary. Grandma would stand over the stovetop, stirring sugar and butter until it thickened into a glossy golden river. She knew if she rushed it, the whole thing would seize. She knew if she stirred too slow, it would burn. Patience was the secret ingredient. When the icing reached the right point, she poured it over the warm cake in one slow, steady motion, letting it run down the sides like silk, no fiddling, no second chances. Once it set, the icing cracked slightly when sliced, revealing the tender cake beneath. Every slice was a celebration of effort, of tradition, of hands that knew exactly what they were doing. Caramel cake tasted like the holidays growing up, sweet, deep, bold, and worth every minute it took. Fried okra bites brought the beloved southern vegetable to Christmas tables in perfect form for passing and sharing. Fresh okra was sliced into rounds, soaked in buttermilk, then dredged in seasoned cornmeal before frying in small batches until crispy and golden. Buttermilk tenderized okra while reducing natural slickness, creating bites crunchy outside and tender within. Families served them hot in napkin-lined baskets, often with remoulade or pepper vinegar for dipping. Preparation required attention. Oil temperature maintained precisely. Okra couldn't sit after dredging or coating became soggy. Grandmothers stationed themselves at stoves, frying continuously, while younger family carried fresh baskets to guests. The aroma of frying okra mixed with holiday spices created scent memories lasting generations. Children claiming to dislike okra often converted by crispy bites, disguising the vegetable's texture. The tradition honored African agricultural heritage while adapting it to celebration, making okra worthy of finest gatherings. Blackberry cobbler was the reunion favorite made from berries that came straight from backyards, fence lines, or summer fields where children stained their fingers purple, gathering enough fruit to fill a pot. The berries cooked down with sugar until they released their deep purple juices, filling the kitchen with a smell that drifted like warm, sweet air across the entire gathering. The crust was dropped in thick spoonfuls or spread across the top, depending on family tradition, and it baked into a golden blanket that cracked open to reveal bubbling fruit beneath. Each scoop held sweet tart berries wrapped in soft dough, and every bowl stained lips and spoons with the color of summer. Blackberry cobbler tasted like hot afternoon's laughter and the pride of bringing something homegrown to the reunion table. It was the dessert that vanished quickly because everyone wanted a taste of the season captured in a single dish. Homemade fudge squares were the holiday treat that brought everyone into the kitchen, whether they planned to help or not. The stovetop pot simmered with cocoa, butter, sugar, and milk, thickening slowly until Grandma declared it ready. She poured it into a buttered pan and let it cool just enough to slice. Kids begged for the corner pieces. Adults pretended they were waiting politely. The fudge was rich, dense, and sweet in a way that tasted like winter itself. Families gathered around the counter, licking spoons, laughing, and stealing pieces when they thought no one was looking. Homemade fudge turned cold nights warm, and the whole process felt like a family ritual that needed no instructions, just participation. The anticipation alone was part of the flavor, stretching from the moment the pot started bubbling to the moment the first bite melted on the tongue. That fudge held the noise of the season, the stories, the inside jokes, and the familiar chaos of everyone crowding around one tiny pan. Fatback fried cabbage was a simple, deeply satisfying dish that turned a humble head of cabbage into a flavorful side worth remembering. Fatback, a cured slab of pork fat with a rich, salty taste, was diced and fried until it released its golden drippings. Into this savory base went shredded cabbage, sizzling as it hit the hot pan and slowly softening while soaking up all the flavor. The edges browned slightly, giving a hint of caramelization, while the tender leaves carried the smoky richness of the pork. This was a dish that needed no complicated seasoning, just salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of vinegar to brighten the flavors. In African American kitchens, especially in the rural South, fatback fried cabbage was an easy way to feed a family, served alongside cornbread and beans or as part of a larger spread. It represented the practice of using every part of what was available, from the vegetables in the garden to the trimmings from a butchered hog. Today, While cabbage is still common, the tradition of frying it in fatback has faded, replaced by lighter cooking methods, but its flavor remains unforgettable to those who grew up eating it. Salmon croquettes appeared on African American Christmas appetizer platters as elegant bites stretching canned fish festively. Canned salmon was flaked, mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, onion, and seasonings, then shaped into patties and fried golden. The exterior turned crispy while interior stayed moist, each bite delivering salmon richness balanced by seasonings. Families made them small for appetizer portions, knowing guests could eat several without filling up. The preparation was economical. A single can yielded a dozen croquettes when stretched with binders. Children often helped shape patties, learning kitchen skills while contributing to preparations. Served with remoulade or tartar sauce, salmon croquettes felt sophisticated despite humble origins. The tradition connected to times when canned salmon provided affordable protein for families far from coasts. These croquettes proved African American cooks transformed pantry staples into celebration. Macaroni salad with diced vegetables served in small cups was creamy comfort food that children recognized and loved. The familiar pasta combined with mayonnaise, pickles, and vegetables, creating flavors that felt like home. Mothers would cook elbow macaroni until tender, drain it, and rinse with cold water before mixing it with mayonnaise, diced celery, chopped pickles, diced bell peppers, hard-boiled eggs, and seasonings. The salad was chilled for several hours, then served in small portions with spoons. Some families added mustard for tang, others included diced pimentos for color, each version reflecting family preferences. In the 1970s, Black households, macaroni salad represented familiar comfort brought to the appetizer table, showing that holiday food didn't always need to be fancy. Children loved macaroni salad because it tasted familiar and satisfying, like picnic food that reminded them of summer even during cold November. Homemade fudge squares were the dense, chocolatey treats that always appeared in foil-lined dishes tucked between cakes and pies on the reunion table. She cooked sugar butter, cocoa, and milk on the stove, stirring constantly until the mixture bubbled thick and glossy. After removing it from the heat, she added vanilla and sometimes chopped nuts before beating it by hand to achieve the perfect texture. Then she poured the mixture into a pan lined with foil, smoothing the top before letting it cool and firm. Once set, she cut the fudge into neat squares, each one rich, creamy, and deeply satisfying. Children grabbed pieces with sticky fingers, and adults tucked extra squares into napkins for the ride home. Homemade fudge tasted like celebration and togetherness, dense with flavor and memory. Oyster patties brought coastal elegance to African American Christmas celebrations, particularly in communities near Gulf and Atlantic shores. Fresh oysters were chopped and folded into creamy sauce seasoned with celery, onion, and sherry, then spooned into flaky pastry shells and baked golden. The combination of briny sweetness with buttery pastry created appetizers feeling luxurious while remaining deeply Southern. Families near oyster beds gathered their own, making the dish practically free despite sophisticated appearance. Patties were arranged on silver trays inherited from grandmothers, passed around parlors as guests arrived. Making them required coordination, shells prepared in advance, filling assembled beforehand, baking timed for warm serving. Church suppers and Christmas Eve gatherings featured these as centerpieces of appetizer spreads. The tradition reflected how African American cooks transformed accessible coastal ingredients into dishes worthy of celebration, proving elegance came from skill rather than expense. Chicken salad stuffed in cherry tomatoes created colorful, bite-sized portions that children eagerly grabbed. The cool, creamy chicken salad contrasting with the fresh, slightly tart tomato cups that held everything together. Aunties would hollow out cherry tomatoes using small spoons or melon ballers, creating little edible bowls that were functional and beautiful when arranged on serving platters. The chicken salad was made from finely chopped cooked chicken mixed with mayonnaise, diced celery, sweet pickle relish, and seasonings. The mixture kept cold until serving time. Each hollowed tomato was filled with a generous spoonful of chicken salad, mounded slightly on top for visual appeal. In 1970s Black households, these stuffed tomatoes represented creativity and presentation. transforming simple ingredients into appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and combined familiar flavors in a fun format. Molasses oat drop cookies were the humble treasures of hearth and home, baked in batches that filled the air with spice and warmth. Oats gave them texture and strength, while molasses made them dark, soft, and fragrant. They were spooned onto greased pans, baked until the edges turned crisp and the centers stayed chewy. These cookies were for after supper, for neighbors visiting, or for children waiting by the stove. Each one tasted like comfort. A little smoky, a little sweet, and endlessly familiar. They lasted for days in a tin, softening with time but never losing their charm. Sometimes a handful of raisins or nuts made their way into the mix, though they were just as perfect plain. The smell alone could draw people from across the yard, following the scent of sugar and firewood. Molasses oat drop cookies were not grand or showy, they were steady, dependable, and kind. Like the hands that made them, they carried history in every bite. Proof that love often lives in the simplest things: warm, brown, and made to share. Apple brown. Betty was the dessert that proved nothing in Grandma's kitchen ever went to waste. If the bread was stale, it went into the dessert. If the apples were bruised, she peeled around the soft spots and used them anyway. Layered with spices, butter, and crumbs, then baked until bubbling, this dish carried the spirit of resourcefulness passed down through generations. It tasted warm, familiar, and comforting in a way only a dessert born from necessity can. Apple Brown Betty showed families that the sweetest things often started with what people overlooked. And during the holidays, when the house was full and the stove seemed to work overtime, this dessert slipped into the lineup like it had always belonged there. The scent alone made people drift into the kitchen, following the cinnamon and butter like a trail. It reminded everyone that good food did not need perfection. It just needed heart, patience, and the willingness to make the most out of what was already there. Pound cake plain or finished with a bright lemon glaze was the steady, dependable reunion dessert that anchored every long table and carried the taste of family history in every slice. Grandmothers mixed the batter by hand in large bowls, their movements slow and sure as they blended butter, sugar, eggs, and flour into a thick, smooth mixture that promised comfort long before it ever reached the oven. As it baked, the kitchen filled with a warm, sweet scent that drifted out the door and into the yard, pulling cousins and neighbors inside with the promise of something familiar. When the cake was finally unmolded, it stood tall and golden with a firm crumb that sliced cleanly and never crumbled, even when carried from house to car to reunion hall. Some families preferred it plain, letting its soft, buttery flavor shine, while others poured a glossy lemon glaze over the top, letting it drip down the sides and cling sweetly to the edges. Pound cake was beloved because it tasted like effort and patience, and because it fed a crowd without ever needing decoration. It traveled well, sat proudly on every dessert table, and never failed to disappear slice by slice as people passed by with paper plates in hand. It was not dramatic, but it was unforgettable because it tasted like home gathering stories and hands that knew exactly how long to beat the batter. Salmon croquettes served as mini appetizers were crispy golden patties that children devoured while standing in kitchens, their hands reaching for more before finishing what they were already eating. Grandmothers would drain cans of pink salmon, carefully picking through the meat to remove bones and skin, then flaking the fish into mixing bowls where it was combined with chopped onions, bell peppers, beaten eggs, cornmeal, and seasonings. The mixture was shaped into small patties, pressed firmly to ensure they held together, then carefully lowered into hot oil where they sizzled and turned golden brown. The exterior developed a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and flavorful. In 1970s, Black households' salmon croquettes were economical elegance, transforming canned fish into something special worthy of holiday tables. Children loved them because they were handheld, didn't require forks, and packed protein and flavor into every crispy bite. Spiced pecans filled candy dishes throughout African American homes during Christmas, their sweet heat drawing hands back repeatedly. Raw pecans were tossed with butter, sugar, cinnamon, cayenne, and salt, then roasted until glossy and fragrant. The coating caramelized during baking, creating a crunchy shell that shattered to reveal rich nut inside. Families made them in large batches, knowing they would disappear quickly. The preparation was simple enough that children could help, stirring nuts in spiced butter before baking. Grandmothers adjusted cayenne to family preferences, with some batches mild and others fiery for adults. Spiced pecans appeared at every gathering, from church socials to family dinners. The tradition connected to southern pecan orchards and African American history of harvesting nuts. These candied nuts proved that the best appetizers combined simplicity with memorable flavor. Chocolate chess pie was the dessert families reserved for nights when the occasion called for something rich and silky enough to make people lean back in their chairs. The filling was made from cocoa, butter, sugar, and eggs, mixed until it became a glossy, chocolatey custard. When it baked, it formed that thin, crackled top that let you know everything underneath was going to be smooth as velvet. One slice was enough to make anyone quiet for a moment. It was perfect for holidays, for celebrations, for late nights when family did not want the evening to end. Chocolate chess pie was a reminder that luxury did not require money, just skill and patience. And it never mattered whether the pie was served on fancy plates or paper ones, because the first bite always stole the attention in the room. Families guarded the recipe like treasure, passing it on only when someone proved they could respect its history. That pie represented pride, tradition, and the belief that simple ingredients could still create something unforgettable. Pineapple upside-down cake was the reunion dessert that sparkled with color and nostalgia, arriving in a well-seasoned pan lined with rings of pineapple and bright red cherries glowing like jewels beneath a caramel-like glaze. The batter was poured gently over the fruit, creating a soft cushion that baked into a moist golden layer, soaking up all the sweet syrup that bubbled beneath it. When the pan was flipped onto a plate, the cake revealed its glossy crown of fruit arranged in perfect circles, each slice holding a piece of pineapple nestled around a cherry that tasted like childhood summers. Families loved it because it was affordable, cheerful, and dependable, always turning out beautiful, no matter how crowded or warm the kitchen became during reunion cooking. The cake itself stayed tender and sweet, and the fruity topping made every bite feel light, even though it carried a richness from the brown sugar glaze. Pineapple upside-down cake added color to the dessert table and reminded everyone of potlucks, church suppers, and afternoons when cousins shared slices under trees while the adults talked nearby. Cane syrup taffy pulls were moments of laughter wrapped in sticky sweetness, one of the few times children on plantations could forget the weight of their world. Syrup was boiled in iron pots until bubbling thick, then poured out to cool and pulled by hand into shiny golden ropes. It was hard work, but it was joy disguised as labor. The smell filled the air like music, burnt sugar and smoke mingling with the sound of laughter. Kids competed to stretch the taffy the longest, their hands gloved in butter to keep it from sticking. It was a shared delight in a life built on scarcity, a fleeting sweetness that belonged entirely to them. When the taffy hardened, it gleamed like amber glass, a memory you could taste. These pulls were more than candy. They were moments of freedom, soft and sweet, that stayed long after the sugar was gone. Gelatin mold desserts were the colorful crown jewels of holiday tables from the 60s to the 80s, the kind of dishes that made children stare and elders smile proudly. These molds came in every shape imaginable, from rings and wreaths to towers that wiggled with every step you took while carrying them. Families used canned fruit, lemon gelatin, lime gelatin, cottage cheese, and sometimes even whipped topping to create layers that looked like stained glass when sliced. The bright colors made them feel festive, and the playful jiggling made them unforgettable. Grandmothers unmolded them with a dramatic pause, tapping the pan just so until the whole creation slid out perfectly, shining like a holiday decoration you could eat. Some versions were sweet and fruity, others creamy and cool, and each family had their own combination they refused to change. gelatin molds were about presentation as much as flavor. They were the dessert that made people say, "Ooh," before they even picked up a spoon. And even though many modern households have left them behind, for decades, these shimmering creations were a symbol of hospitality, celebration, and the joy of putting something beautiful on the table during the holidays. Oatmeal raisin bars were the reunion dessert that traveled well-sliced into sturdy squares that held together in warm weather and fed children quickly without fuss. She mixed oats, flour, butter, eggs, sugar raisins, and a touch of spice into a thick batter that baked into golden, chewy bars with crisp edges and soft centers that stuck lovingly to napkins. When she cut them into neat rows, steam escaped, carrying the scent of cinnamon-toasted oats and warm sugar that drifted across the yard like a soft announcement that dessert was ready. These bars were reliable, comforting, and easy to stack in tins for road trips or for handing out under shade trees. Sometimes she drizzled a bit of icing across the top, sometimes she left them plain, but they always tasted like home raisins, added bursts of sweetness in every bite, and the bars felt hearty enough to satisfy hungry relatives between games, conversations, and long hugs. Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated. The cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce, creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries. Hogshead cheese showcased African-American mastery of using every part of the animal with respect and creativity. Despite its name, this wasn't cheese but a cold cut made by simmering head meat until tender, then chopping it fine and setting it in natural gelatin. Sliced thin and served on crackers or bread rounds, hogshead cheese offered complex flavors. Savory meat bound by silky aspic flavored with vinegar, sage, and black pepper. Families made it during hog killing season, timing preparation to have fresh slices ready for Christmas. The dish required patience and skill, with cooks carefully balancing seasonings and achieving proper texture. Elders remembered when hogshead cheese represented survival rather than celebration, but Christmas presentation elevated it with pride. Younger guests sometimes hesitated at the appearance, but one taste often converted them into believers. The tradition connected holiday tables to agricultural roots, honoring animals by wasting nothing and transforming every part into nourishment. Pecan sandies made from scratch were the melt-in-your-mouth cookies that older women loved gifting to neighbors, teachers, and church friends during the holidays. They were crumbly, buttery, and full of toasted pecans, the kind of cookie that dissolved on your tongue before you even had time to savor it properly. The dough was simple, but the flavor tasted expensive, especially in decades when pecans were considered a treat. Families roasted the nuts carefully, letting their rich aroma fill the kitchen before folding them into the dough. When the cookies baked, the whole house smelled warm and nutty in a way that felt instantly festive. These sandies were wrapped in wax paper, tucked into old tins, and delivered with pride. They were a holiday tradition rooted in generosity, hospitality, and the belief that good food should always be shared. People waited all year for them. Peach hand pies were the grab-and-go treasures of Southern kitchens. Mama filled circles of dough with sticky peaches or apple butter, folded them over, and sealed the edges with the back of a fork. They were fried until golden, the fruit bubbling inside, then laid to cool on brown paper that soaked up the extra oil. The smell could stop a child in their tracks. Each pie was small enough for one hand, but big enough to fill an afternoon hunger. They were treats for picnics, church socials, or long car rides on summer Sundays. The crust snapped between your teeth, giving way to warm, syrupy filling that stained your fingers sweet. Kids lined up for them before dinner, trying not to get caught. Some families dusted them with sugar, others dipped them in syrup or honey. No two tasted quite the same, but all shared the same joy. Peach hand pies were freedom disguised as dessert, portable, personal, and perfectly Southern. They tasted of sunshine and home, made from what was ripe and ready. They were proof that love could fit in your hand, warm enough to carry and sweet enough to remember. Bourbon meatballs simmered in chafing dishes at African American Christmas gatherings, their sweet glaze drawing guests back. Ground beef or pork was mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, and seasonings, shaped into balls and browned before bathing in sauce of bourbon, brown sugar, and tomato. The alcohol cooked off, leaving caramel sweetness balancing savory meat. Families kept them warm throughout celebrations, sauce thickening as hours passed. The bourbon added sophistication, elevating simple meatballs into something guests discussed for days. Church gatherings featured these regularly, with cooks adjusting bourbon to preference. Children could eat them safely since alcohol evaporated. The preparation allowed advanced cooking, with meatballs made days ahead and reheated. Bourbon meatballs represented the African American gift for creating elegance from simple ingredients and transforming everyday food into celebration. Cream cheese and olive pinwheels, made with softened cream cheese mixed with chopped green olives and rolled in tortillas, created tangy, savory bites. Children found intriguing. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with finely chopped green olives, pimentos, and sometimes a touch of garlic powder, spreading the mixture evenly on flour tortillas. The tortillas were rolled tightly, wrapped in plastic, and refrigerated for hours to firm up before being sliced into colorful pinwheels. Each slice revealed swirls of white cream cheese dotted with green olive pieces, creating visual appeal that drew children's attention. In 1970s, Black households, these pinwheels represented creative entertaining, showing how simple ingredients could become elegant appetizers. Children loved them because they were fun to look at, easy to eat, and introduced them to olives in a creamy format that made the vegetables more approachable and less intimidating than eating them whole. Persimmon pudding was the regional dessert that appeared at reunions in areas where backyard persimmon trees grew heavy with fruit. She scooped the soft, ripe pulp and mixed it with sugar, eggs, flour, and warm spices, creating a batter that baked into a dense, comforting pudding. The texture was somewhere between cake and custard, moist, rich, and fragrant with cinnamon and nutmeg. Served warm with whipped cream or vanilla ice cream, it tasted like earthy sweetness layered with deep seasonal flavor. Families passed the pudding around in generous spoonfuls, celebrating the short window when persimmons were perfectly ripe. It was a dessert tied closely to place memory and heritage, making each bite a reminder of home. Miniature cornbread muffins with honey butter were golden gems that children popped into their mouths whole, the crumbly cornbread texture melting while sweet honey butter added richness. Mothers would prepare cornbread batter using stone-ground cornmeal, flour, eggs, buttermilk, and just enough sugar to balance the corn's natural earthiness, then spoon it into mini muffin tins that baked quickly. The muffins emerged from ovens with crispy, slightly caramelized tops and tender, crumbly interiors that begged to be broken open and slathered with butter. Honey butter was made by whipping softened butter with honey until fluffy and smooth, creating a spread that melted instantly when slathered on hot muffins. In the 1970s, Black households, these miniature cornbread muffins represented Southern hospitality in bite-sized form. Children loved them because they were individually portioned, making them feel like special treats rather than ordinary bread, and the sweet honey butter made every bite feel indulgent and special. Liver pudding rounds brought distinctive Carolina and Virginia flavors to African American Christmas appetizer spreads. This specialty combined pork liver with cornmeal, spices, and sometimes rice, cooked until thick enough to slice, then fried until edges crisped and centers stayed creamy. Served on crackers or toast rounds, the pudding offered rich, iron-forward flavor pairing perfectly with sharp mustard or pepper jelly. Families purchased liver pudding from local butchers following regional traditions, or prepared their own using recipes passed through generations. The dish represented nose-to-tail philosophy that African American cooks perfected from necessity but continued from appreciation. Children often resisted initially, but adults insisted they try at least one bite. Knowing acquired tastes became lifelong favorites. Fried rounds disappeared quickly from platters, with guests returning for seconds. Liver pudding connected Christmas to everyday survival foods, elevating humble ingredients through skilled preparation. Molasses apple dumplings were small bundles of joy wrapped in dough and baked in bubbling syrup. Whole apples were peeled, cored, and stuffed with brown sugar and spice, then folded into pastry made from the simplest ingredients: flour, lard, and a pinch of hope. As they baked, the molasses caramelized into a thick, sticky sauce that clung to the edges like honey. The scent alone could fill a home with warmth, even when winter winds pressed hard against the walls. Families made them during harvest season, a celebration of labor and reward, of fruit gathered and shared. They were sweet, tart, and heavy with meaning, the taste of both work and rest. The sauce was spooned over each dumpling as it came out of the oven, pooling into a dark, glossy sweetness that felt like abundance. Each bite melted between the teeth, soft and fragrant, carrying traces of cinnamon and smoke. Served with milk or cream if one was lucky, these dumplings carried comfort through generations. In their syrupy folds lived the story of people who refused to let hardship steal the sweetness from their table, who baked hope into every humble crust. Cinnamon-baked apples with brown sugar were the kind of simple, fragrant dessert that needed nothing extra to shine. Apples were peeled, cored, and tucked into a baking dish with pats of butter, spoonfuls of sugar, and heavy shakes of cinnamon until they were fully dressed for the oven. As they baked, they softened into warm, tender desserts that filled the house with a smell so comforting it felt like a blanket kids loved digging into the soft centers. Elders loved how the syrup pooled at the bottom like liquid caramel. These apples were affordable, easy, and perfect for cold nights when families wanted something sweet but not heavy. They tasted like comfort, like warmth, like stories told over kitchen tables long after dinner ended. Sweet potato pie was the deeply rooted reunion dessert tied to gardens, home kitchens, and family wisdom passed down through generations. Grandmothers roasted sweet potatoes until their skins loosened and the flesh turned soft and sweet, then mashed them with milk, sugar, eggs, and warm spices until the filling glowed a deep orange. Poured into a homemade crust and baked slowly, the pie set into a silky custard that carried the taste of memory in every bite. Its aroma filled kitchens with the scent of nutmeg, cinnamon, and roasted sweetness, reminding everyone of holidays, harvests, and the hands that taught them how to cook. At reunions, sweet potato pie stood proudly beside every cake, cobbler, and pudding because it represented history, home, and identity. One slice held the softness of family stories and the strength of those who baked it long before modern recipes existed. Fried okra rounds served with ranch dressing were crispy, crunchy appetizers that introduced children to vegetables in ways that made them forget they were eating something healthy, the golden coating making every bite feel like a treat. Mothers would slice fresh okra into thick rounds, coating them first in buttermilk that helped breading adhere, then dredging them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. The okra rounds were dropped into hot oil where they bubbled and crisped, the cornmeal coating turning golden brown while the okra inside stayed tender. Once drained on paper towels and sprinkled with extra salt while still hot, the okra was piled into serving bowls and placed near small dishes of ranch dressing that children dunked them into with enthusiasm. In Black households during the 1970s, fried okra represented Southern tradition meeting holiday hospitality. Children loved fried okra because it felt like eating fried chicken in vegetable form. Sardine spread offered affordable protein and bold flavor on African American Christmas appetizer tables, transforming canned fish into celebration food. Sardines were mashed with cream cheese, lemon juice, hot sauce, and minced onion until smooth enough to spread on crackers. The flavor was assertive, briny, rich, and unmistakably fishy, but devotees considered that intensity the whole point. Families appreciated how a single can of sardines combined with pantry staples could feed a dozen guests, making the spread economical. The preparation took minutes, allowing cooks to focus on more demanding dishes while still offering variety. Children often avoided sardine spread, but adults who grew up eating it sought it out at gatherings, disappointed when it didn't appear. The tradition connected to times when canned fish provided essential nutrition during lean periods, with Christmas elevating survival food. Sardine spread reminded families that flavor didn't require expensive ingredients, just confidence in traditional tastes. Coconut cake with cloudy frosting was the towering masterpiece that families pulled out when they wanted the dessert table to look like it belonged in a celebration. The cake itself was tender and pale, flavored lightly with vanilla and butter, but the frosting was where the magic happened. That fluffy white cloud, whipped from egg whites and sugar or sometimes from a stovetop icing, only elders knew how to make, turned the cake into something that felt almost dreamlike. Once the frosting was spread and smoothed, the coconut came spilling down like fresh snow, sticking to every corner until the entire cake shimmered. Children begged to help sprinkle the coconut, even if they made a mess doing it. Grandmothers let them anyway, because the cake was as much about family as it was about flavor. When it was finally sliced, the soft layers and airy icing melted together in a way that made every bite feel delicate and joyful. This cake showed up at Christmas, at New Year gatherings, and at big winter birthdays when families wanted to offer something that felt generous and celebratory. It was the kind of dessert people stood around admiring before they even tasted it. And once they did, they remembered it all year long. Jam thumbprint cookies were cheerful and simple, with a small well pressed into each dough ball and filled with jam. They were often made with whatever preserves families had on hand, which made them highly adaptable. These cookies became popular at youth gatherings and school events because they were easy to bake in big numbers and fun for children to help prepare. During the Civil Rights era, thumbprint cookies often appeared at bake sales that raised money for organizing efforts or community programs. The bright spots of jam in the center gave them a festive look even when times were difficult. Families took pride in baking them, and children carried them off napkins at the end of church suppers with sticky fingers. They were small, colorful reminders that joy could still be made from humble kitchens. Thumbprint cookies stood out not for their cost, but for the way they turned simple ingredients into something that felt special. Spinach dip, served with crackers and vegetables, was creamy, savory goodness that children scooped up enthusiastically. The rich cream cheese and sour cream base mixed with chopped spinach and seasonings, creating dips that tasted indulgent. Aunties would thaw frozen chopped spinach and squeeze out all the excess water before mixing it with softened cream cheese, sour cream, mayonnaise, dried vegetable soup mix, and sometimes water chestnuts for added crunch. The mixture was stirred together until smooth and well combined, then refrigerated for several hours to allow flavors to meld and develop depth. Some families served the dip cold, while others baked it briefly to create warm, bubbling cheese pulls that made every scoop exciting. In 1970s, Black households, spinach dip represented modern entertaining, recipes that came from package instructions but became beloved traditions. Children loved spinach dip because the vegetables were hidden in creamy richness, making them willing to eat greens. Chess pie was the pantry-friendly reunion dessert that proved simple ingredients could create something unforgettable with only a few motions of a practiced hand. Egg, sugar, buttermilk, and a scoop of cornmeal mixed into a smooth, pale filling that baked into a golden top with a delicate crackle and a custard center that tasted sweet, warm, and familiar. The pie needed no fruit, no glaze, no decoration, because its flavor stood strong on its own, carrying a richness that came from the balance of creamy custard and a hint of cornmeal texture. At reunions, chess pie sat quietly beside the fancier desserts, but it never stayed untouched, because those who knew it understood its power. Each slice tasted like tradition thrift and the creativity of cooks who made something special from what they had on the shelf. 7-Up cake was the bright citrus-soaked reunion classic that brought a cheerful spark to every dessert table thanks to its airy texture and lemon-lime sweetness. The batter mixed into a pale, silky pour that gained its lift from the soda folded carefully inside a trick that made the cake light, tender, and bursting with flavor. as it baked the kitchen filled with a fresh citrus scent that felt like summer even on cloudy days, and children hovered near the oven, hoping the timer would ring early. When the cake cooled, it revealed soft golden curves shaped by the bundt pan, making it one of the most eye-catching desserts at any family gathering. A warm sugar glaze was poured over the top, soaking into every ridge and giving each bite a sweet, bright finish. Families looked for it at every reunion because it tasted like celebration without costing much to make. Each slice carried the memory of afternoons spent laughing outdoors and long tables full of food that brought people together year after year. Think again. Black families passed around platters of homemade appetizers that opened celebrations with flavor and tradition. Let's dig into 30 forgotten African American Christmas appetizers no one makes anymore. Cheese straws were the golden welcome of every African American Christmas gathering, twisting their way onto platters before guests removed their coats. These spirals combined sharp cheddar with flour, butter, and cayenne, mixed until the dough could be pressed through cookie presses or rolled and sliced by hand. Baking filled kitchens with toasted cheese and spice, signaling the celebration had begun. Families stored them in tins lined with wax paper, keeping them crisp for days of visiting. Church ladies competed over whose straws had perfect heat and richness, with recipes guarded closely. Children sneaked handfuls from parlor tables when adults weren't watching, learning these twists were worth getting caught. The tradition connected generations, with grandmothers teaching granddaughters the exact pressure needed for perfect straws. Store-bought versions cannot capture what homemade cheese straws represented: pride, hospitality, and the unmistakable taste of a Black Southern Christmas. Bread pudding with raisins turned leftover bread into a dessert that felt like it belonged on every holiday table. The bread was torn into pieces, soaked in milk, sugar, cinnamon, and eggs, then baked until the top crisped and the center stayed soft and custardy. Raisins swelled inside, turning plump and sweet as they baked. This dish came from the belief that nothing in a good kitchen should ever be wasted, especially during holidays when families were doing their best to stretch what they had. The smell alone wrapped the house in warmth. When served warm with a little vanilla or a drizzle of cream, it tasted like comfort handed down from older generations who knew how to make something luxurious from scraps. Bread pudding was practical, but it was also special, a reminder that love could turn anything into dessert. Cocktail meatballs simmered in grape jelly and chili sauce created sweet, savory bites that children couldn't resist, the glossy sauce coating each meatball like candy while delivering unexpected flavors. Mothers would brown frozen meatballs in skillets before transferring them to slow cookers or pots where they simmered in a mixture of grape jelly and bottled chili sauce that melted together into a thick, shiny glaze. The combination sounded strange but tasted magical, the grape jelly's sweetness balancing the chili sauce's tang and creating a flavor profile that kept people reaching for more. As the meatballs simmered, they absorbed the sauce and became tender, the exterior developing a sticky coating that made them perfect for spearing with toothpicks. In Black households during the 1970s, these cocktail meatballs represented easy elegance, a recipe that seemed fancy but required minimal effort. Children loved them because they were bite-sized, required no cutting, and tasted like a sweet, savory treat. Bacon-wrapped dates appeared on African American Christmas appetizer spreads, offering perfect balance of sweet, salty, and savory. Medjool dates were pitted and sometimes stuffed with almonds before being wrapped in bacon and baked until bacon crisped. The combination worked because bacon's smokiness enhanced dates' caramel sweetness while textures contrasted perfectly. Families learned this appetizer from church cookbooks or neighbors, and it quickly became a holiday standard. The preparation was simple enough for children to help, wrapping dates and securing with toothpicks. Baking rendered bacon fat while caramelizing dates, creating something greater than components suggested. Church gatherings featured platters that disappeared within minutes, with guests returning until nothing remained. This appetizer proved that the best holiday foods came from simple combinations executed with care. Parched corn candy was a small sweet treasure crafted from the same grain that fed the body and the spirit. Roasted corn kernels were ground fine, mixed with honey or molasses, and pressed into sticky rounds that hardened as they cooled. They were both candy and sustenance, pocket-sized energy for the weary and a rare treat for children. The flavor was smoky and sweet, a reminder of the fields that gave both labor and life. These candies were made during quiet evenings by the fire, when laughter mixed with the scent of roasted corn and syrup. Every piece was hand-shaped and precious, because sweetness was a luxury few could afford. Yet in those moments, sweetness was not just taste, it was resistance. Parched corn candy was proof that joy could be made, even when the world refused to give it freely. Pound cake made in heavy bundt pans was the blueprint dessert that every grandmother had her own version of, and she would defend that version like it was family law. Thick, dense, buttery, and reliable, pound cake sat on every holiday table, whether it was Thanksgiving, Christmas, or a Sunday gathering that ran long. The bundt pan itself carried history, scratched and seasoned from years of baking. Grandma creamed the butter and sugar until her arm ached, then added eggs one by one like steps in a ritual. The batter was always heavy, and so was the responsibility of not wasting a drop. When the cake baked, it rose slow and steady, filling the house with a smell that made kids wander into the kitchen like sleepwalkers. Pound cake sliced clean, held its shape, and paired with anything, ice cream, fruit, or just a quiet moment alone. It was the dessert that reminded families that sometimes the simplest things lasted the longest. Black walnut ice cream was the taste of rare celebration, a dessert that demanded patience and strength. The nuts had to be cracked open by hand, their shells tough as stone, yielding small bits of rich, oily meat. Those pieces were stirred into thick cream, sugar, and eggs, then churned slowly over ice by hand. The flavor was bold, earthy, and slightly bitter, a perfect match for the heat of southern summers. Families brought it out for special gatherings, its cold sweetness shared from chipped enamel bowls. The process was slow, but that made it sacred. Every turn of the churn felt like a step toward joy earned through labor. The cold sting of the ice, the rhythm of hands turning the handle, the laughter that rose between pulls, these moments were as precious as the dessert itself. Black walnut ice cream was not fast, but it was faithful. Proof that good things like freedom and flavor took time. In each scoop lingered the taste of resilience, of people who turned endurance into sweetness and made the waiting worthwhile. Fried dill pickles offered unexpected delight on African-American Christmas appetizer tables, transforming tangy pickles into crispy bites. Dill pickle slices were drained well, dipped in seasoned batter, then fried until coating turned golden while inside stayed cool and tangy. The contrast between hot, crispy exterior and cold, sour interior surprised guests encountering the combination. Families discovered this appetizer through county fairs or adventurous cooks experimenting with frying. The preparation required proper draining to prevent spattering and batter adhering to wet surfaces. Children especially loved fried pickles, finding them more exciting than raw pickles could be. Served with ranch dressing for dipping, they disappeared quickly from platters. Fried dill pickles represented African-American spirit of culinary innovation, transforming familiar ingredients into something making people smile. Asparagus wrapped in ham created elegant finger food that introduced children to vegetables they might not try otherwise, the salty ham making the asparagus taste less intimidating. Mothers would blanch fresh asparagus spears briefly in boiling water until they turned bright green and became slightly tender, then plunge them into ice water. Each asparagus spear was then wrapped with a thin slice of deli ham, sometimes spread with cream cheese or mustard first for extra flavor. The wrapped spears were arranged on serving platters, sometimes secured with toothpicks if the ham wouldn't stay wrapped. In Black households during the 1970s, asparagus wrapped in ham represented sophistication borrowed from magazine recipes, appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because the ham provided familiar salty flavor, while the asparagus added crunch and color, making vegetables feel like treats rather than obligations. Ambrosia salad was the bowl of sweetness that appeared in chilled dishes at nearly every reunion table made from fruit coconut cream and the soft, fluffy textures families associated with celebration. She mixed oranges, pineapple grapes, and cherries with whipped cream or sour cream, depending on family preference, stirring until everything glowed with color and looked like a rainbow poured into a bowl. Coconut flakes added texture and sweetness, while marshmallows softened into the creamy base, making each spoonful light yet rich and perfect for passing around before the heat settled in. Sometimes she added pecans. Sometimes she added a splash of cherry juice, but no matter the variation, the spirit of the dish stayed the same. Ambrosia salad was both simple and festive, offering cool relief during hot afternoons, when reunions stretched into long outdoor gatherings and children ran between tables barefoot. It tasted like summer fruit and shared laughter, and its bright colors made the dessert table look joyful, like a celebration that never needed permission to shine. Souse meat slices showcased preservation art, sustaining African American families through lean times and celebrating abundance during holidays. Preparation involved boiling pig's feet, ears, and snouts until tender, then chopping meat and suspending it in natural gelatin, seasoned with vinegar, hot peppers, and spices. The mixture was poured into molds and chilled until firm, then sliced thin for platters. Texture was unlike anything else. Cool, slightly chewy meat bound by savory jelly melting on the tongue. Families made souse days before Christmas, allowing flavors to develop fully. The dish required skill to balance vinegar's tang against meat's richness, with every household having different preferences. Elders ate souse with reverence, remembering when it represented survival rather than celebration. Younger generations often needed encouragement to try it, but those who did discovered flavors connecting them to ancestors. Souse reminded everyone that nothing worth having comes without patience, and heritage deserves preservation. Chicken liver pâté spread on crackers created rich, smooth bites that adventurous children tried, the creamy texture and distinctive flavor introducing them to foods that felt grown-up and sophisticated. Aunties would sauté chicken livers with onions and butter until cooked through but still slightly pink inside, then blend them with cream cheese, spices, and sometimes brandy or sherry until smooth. The pâté was chilled in molds or ramekins, then unmolded onto serving platters surrounded by crackers and garnished with chopped parsley or capers. The texture was silky smooth, while the flavor was rich and slightly metallic in that characteristic liver way that some loved and others found challenging. In Black households during the 1970s, chicken liver pâté represented culinary sophistication, recipes borrowed from French cuisine and adapted to Southern ingredients. Children who tried it felt brave and grown up, stepping outside their comfort zones to taste foods their parents enjoyed at special gatherings. Butterscotch pudding made from scratch was the stovetop dessert that made children gather with spoons in hand long before it had finished cooling. Butter, brown sugar, and milk simmered into a warm, golden mixture, thickened slowly until it became velvety and smooth. Grandmothers stirred with rhythmic patience, never rushing the process. When the pudding was poured into bowls, steam rose into the cold winter air like a warm invitation. Each spoonful tasted rich, buttery, and nostalgic, reminding families that the best desserts often came from humble ingredients transformed with care. Vinegar cobbler was born out of clever desperation, a pie made without fruit when fruit was nowhere to be found. During lean times, cooks discovered that a few spoonfuls of vinegar could mimic the tang of apples or berries when mixed with sugar and spice. The filling bubbled golden beneath a biscuit crust, the scent of caramel and acid mingling in the air. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like luxury to those who made it. Every bite was tart, sweet, and full of resilience, a dessert that turned an empty pantry into abundance. The vinegar balanced the sweetness perfectly, fooling even those who didn't know the secret. For families scraping by, this dish was proof that imagination could be as nourishing as food itself. Vinegar cobbler might have vanished from modern tables, but in its time, it was a triumph of spirit baked into a humble pie dish. Green tomato slices served with remoulade sauce were crispy, tangy bites that introduced children to Southern traditions, the cornmeal coating providing crunch while the tart tomato inside stayed firm and flavorful. Mothers would slice green tomatoes thick, dredge them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour and spices, then fry them in hot oil until golden brown and crispy. The remoulade sauce was made from mayonnaise, mustard, pickles, capers, and spices, creating a tangy, creamy dip that complemented the fried tomatoes perfectly. Each slice was served hot with a small dish of sauce for dipping, the combination of temperatures and textures making every bite interesting. In 1970s, Black households, fried green tomatoes represented end-of-season resourcefulness, using tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before frost to create something delicious. Children loved fried green tomatoes because they were crispy like French fries but tasted tangy and different, expanding their understanding of what vegetables could be. Sock it to me. Cake arrived at reunions in heavy bundt pans, carried carefully by aunties who knew the warm, spiced swirl inside would be gone before the day ended. The batter was mixed thick and smooth, then layered with a ribbon of cinnamon sugar and chopped nuts that baked into a hidden filling rich enough to earn its reputation. When the cake rose in the oven, the air filled with the scent of spice warmth and sweetness drifting through kitchens and across picnic shelters until people started asking who made it. Once cooled, it turned out beautifully with a golden crust and a tender crumb that sliced cleanly, revealing the dark sweet swirl inside. A simple glaze poured over the top gave it a soft shine and made each slice taste like something crafted with skill passed down over generations. Sock It to Me cake became a reunion favorite because it felt special without being fussy, and because its comforting flavors made every person at the table feel welcome. Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts delivered crispy, salty, and slightly sweet bites that children fought over despite not knowing exactly what water chestnuts were, the bacon exterior and crunchy interior creating mysterious but delicious combinations. Aunties would drain cans of whole water chestnuts, wrapping each one with half a strip of bacon and securing it with toothpicks before arranging them on baking sheets. Before baking, each bundle was brushed with a mixture of brown sugar and soy sauce that caramelized during cooking, creating a sweet salty glaze that coated the bacon. The water chestnuts roasted until the bacon was crispy and rendered, the fat dripping away while the sugar coating turned golden brown and slightly sticky. In Black households during the 1970s, bacon-wrapped water chestnuts represented sophistication borrowed from magazines, recipes that seemed fancy but remained simple for home cooks. Children loved them because bacon made everything better. Cocktail sausages wrapped in flaky biscuit dough emerged from ovens as golden crescents that children grabbed from cooling racks, burning their fingers but unable to wait. Mothers would roll out refrigerated biscuit dough, cutting it into strips before wrapping each small sausage like a tiny gift and arranging them on greased baking sheets. The wrapped sausages baked until the dough turned golden brown and flaky, the fat from the sausages creating pockets of rich, meaty flavor. Some families brushed the tops with melted butter and sesame seeds before baking, adding extra richness and subtle, nutty crunch. In Black households during the 1970s, these sausage rolls appeared at every major holiday, their ease of preparation making them perfect for busy cooks managing multiple dishes. Children loved them because they were small, portable, and perfectly sized for little hands. Hot water cornbread bites transformed the everyday staple into elegant appetizers worthy of Christmas gatherings. The technique required skill. Cornmeal mixed with boiling water, salt, and sometimes sugar, shaped into small rounds and fried until golden. The hot water created texture crisp outside yet tender within, unlike any other cornbread. Families served these warm on platters lined with cloth napkins, alongside pepper jelly or potlikker for dipping. Preparation became communal, with multiple hands shaping bites, while cast-iron skillets worked continuously. Grandmothers insisted water had to be truly boiling and oil exactly the right temperature, passing down wisdom no cookbook contained. Children gathered around stoves, waiting for the first batch to cool enough to eat. The simplicity of ingredients belied the complexity of perfection, making hot water cornbread bites a test separating novice cooks from masters. This appetizer proved that humble ingredients prepared with care could rival anything on fancy tables. Holiday sweet potato pie was the dessert that told the whole family the season had finally arrived. long before anyone hung lights or pulled out the good dishes. It started with those sweet potatoes that had been roasted until their skins slipped off with barely a touch, turning soft and bright and ready for Grandma's hands. She did not need written instructions or temperature notes to guide her. She knew how much butter went in because she had been making this pie since before you were born. She knew how much cinnamon and nutmeg the family liked because she never forgot which cousin wanted an extra warm slice. When she mashed everything together in that old mixing bowl, the kitchen filled with a deep, familiar smell that wrapped itself around the house like a quilt pulled straight from storage. Bread pudding with raisins was the warm, thrifty dessert that turned stale bread into something soft, sweet, and unforgettable at every family reunion. Grandmothers tore leftover bread into pieces, soaking them in a mixture of milk eggs, sugar, and vanilla, until each piece absorbed the custard and softened into tender shapes waiting to bake. Raisins were sprinkled throughout, adding tiny bursts of sweetness that plumped up during baking, turning soft and juicy inside the warm pudding. As the dish baked, the top browned into a gentle crust, while the inside stayed soft, creamy, and full of flavor, filling the kitchen with a scent that wrapped around everyone like a blanket. Served warm from the oven, it tasted like comfort, simplicity, and the skill of elders who wasted nothing and created everything from what little they had. Bread pudding reminded families that desserts did not need to be expensive to feel like love. Cheese wafers made with sharp cheddar and butter created crispy, salty crackers that children munched by the handful, their homemade quality far superior to anything store-bought could offer. Grandmothers would cream softened butter with finely shredded sharp cheddar cheese, then gradually add flour, salt, and cayenne pepper until the mixture formed a stiff dough. The dough was rolled into logs, wrapped in wax paper, and chilled until firm, then sliced into thin rounds and baked until golden brown and crispy. As they baked, the cheese melted into the butter and flour, creating crackers that were rich, savory, and addictively crunchy with just a hint of heat from the cayenne. In 1970s, Black households, cheese wafers represented Southern tradition and hospitality, recipes that had been passed down through generations. Children loved cheese wafers because they tasted like cheesy potato chips but felt more sophisticated since they were homemade. Sweet potato tea cakes were soft little miracles that brought a whisper of sweetness to hard days. Made from mashed sweet potatoes, sugar, and flour, they baked up tender and fragrant, somewhere between a cookie and a biscuit. The flavor was deep and earthy, tied to the African roots that first carried sweet potatoes across the ocean. Women baked them for children after long hours in the fields, serving them with tea, molasses, or just a kind word. The dough was often mixed by hand in wooden bowls, shaped without measuring, guided only by touch and memory. Even in times when sugar was scarce, the natural sweetness of the potato carried the recipe through. Each cake was a lesson in resourcefulness and care, a soft, spiced offering that said, "We made it through another day." To eat one was to taste both survival and love, baked gently into every crumb. Old-fashioned tea cakes were the holiday treats that looked simple on the outside, but carried generations of memory inside every bite. Soft, lightly sweet, and shaped by hand, they were the cookies children reached for before dinner even started. Grandma made them without hesitation, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who had shaped thousands before. They were not fancy, they were not decorated, but they were the first cookie gone at every gathering. Tea cakes tasted like childhood, like visiting cousins, like long stories told late into the evening. They were the kind of dessert no one wrote down, yet everyone knew. And the beauty of them came from the way they connected everyone in the room, young and old, through something so small yet full of love. When the tin opened and that familiar smell drifted out, people paused because they knew what was coming. Those tea cakes held the kind of comfort you could not buy and could not fake, built from steady hands and traditions that survived every decade. Caramel cake was the kind of reunion dessert that revealed who in the family had the patience and skill to stand over a hot stove, stirring icing long enough to make it perfect. The cake layers themselves were simple, tender and pale, but the icing was where the magic lived, thick, sweet, and slow cooked, until it deepened into a golden brown that tasted like butter warmth and memory. Grandmothers guarded their caramel icing method with pride because it took steady hands and a calm heart to keep the sugar from scorching as it bubbled and darkened in the pot. Once ready, the icing was poured over the stacked layers while still warm, spreading into silky drapes that coated every inch before cooling into a soft caramel shell. At reunions, the caramel cake always looked humble on the outside, but the moment it was sliced, people hurried forward for a piece because they knew the flavor inside carried generations of practice. The icing melted on the tongue with a sweetness that felt deep and comforting, and the cake beneath was tender enough to soak up every drop. Caramel cake tasted like real labor poured into something meant to be shared and celebrated. It reminded everyone that the best desserts came from time, attention, and love stirred slowly over a warm stove. Which forgotten dessert brought back the sweetest memories? Drop your favorite in the comments and share which one you're making first. Hit that like button if these recipes reminded you of home, and subscribe so we can keep preserving these precious traditions together.